are the role models. We are the caretakers. We are the scene setters. We are the acceptors of blame for all things that our younger siblings did. In my case, I was sort of the stoic, suffering sister with a very pretty, very precocious younger sister, and that's defined both of us for much of our adult lives.
Sisters, hey, little girl, are you looking for hope in a world that has lied to you about who you really are? Wrong woman, holding in story she needs to tell what God really wants you to do in this world. In His name, hope to break free from the shackles and the lies.
Hello, welcome back to Stacy Speaks Hope. Today we have the pleasure, and I'm excited to introduce Deana Martin. She's a woman who has gone through what we've agreed is one of the hardest chapters of her life. And now she has turned that into a mission for transformation and hope for others by giving them tools to decode their emotional responses and the effect and bring to light the effect that they have on the decisions that they make. So thank you so much for being here this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me, Stacy. It's an honor. Likewise an honor for me.
Wonderful. Well, I'll let you tell a little more of your story.
All right. Well, the short of it is I'm a felon. I was convicted of trafficking in marijuana along with, accompanying charges back in 2021, October of 21. I actually accepted a plea. I reported to prison at Alderson, which is where Martha Stewart spent her time, on March 1st of 2022, which happens to be my oldest son's birthday. I spent 6 months there before transferring to Danbury, which is where Piper Kerman in Orange is the New Black served her time. Spent a year there, and I've been home now almost exactly 2 months. October 22nd of 2023, I was released.
Well, welcome home.
Thank you. Happy to be here in more ways than I can express. Prison is a trip, to say the least.
Wonderful. Thank you for just bringing that to light, making light of it, because you're gonna transform lives. So let's dig in to the theme.
Okay.
When you think of your little girl, what do you remember about her? What did she like? What influenced her as you've done your work?
As a little girl, I was the oldest, right? So it was me and my younger sister. So as many of us oldest children are, we are the role models. We are the caretakers. We are the scene setters. We are the acceptors of blame for all things that our younger siblings did. In my case, I was sort of the stoic, suffering sister with a very pretty, very precocious younger sister, and that's defined both of us for much of our adult lives.
So happy to make available to you the No More Lies guided workbook and healing journal. Here's a quick peek inside that will help you get your own copy to see what we've been talking about and having a place to write your thoughts as you remember your little girl, identify the lies, find the truth, and then rehearse that truth so that you can walk into the purpose God has called you to. Go to stacyspeakshope.com and order your copy today.
So I was a very good student. I used to ask my teachers for homework starting in elementary school. I was studious. I was a bookworm, but I also spent a lot of time outside. I grew up in a very tight-knit Italian community in Newton. And Matt LeBlanc is actually from one street over from me. But my cousins, I had three cousins around my age who grew up 2 houses down. So 3 boys. So my sister and I spent a lot of time playing outdoors. Of course, this was the 70s, right? We did not have video games. And in the summers, TV was all reruns. So if you didn't play outside, you were inside and you were bored. And the mother's refrain was, go outside. Don't come in until the street lights come on. you know that, right? And even then,
Yes.
even after the streetlights came on, we would play these nighttime games of hide and seek. So I grew up with a lot of texture and fun and outdoor activity. My dad took us to, canoeing and bike riding. We had a lot of fruit trees, so we grew up canning tomatoes and jarring peaches. And but I live in the suburbs. I'm not from the country. I'm literally 4 miles away from downtown Boston where I live. So I would say, have a very overall happy upbringing. I was a happy kid. My parents divorced when I was 12. That was I will admit was difficult. We moved away from this neighborhood that I had grown up in to a neighboring town of Waltham, which is where I went to middle school and high school. Graduated there and then came back to Newton to go to Boston College. So I graduated from BC in '91. So I would say I was an outdoor adventurous bookworm if I had to characterize myself at that age.
Were there any moments that you, as you looked at, especially as you look back at your life through the lens of what you've experienced in your time going through this incarceration, that defined how you saw yourself? You mentioned about your sister. What was the impact of that on you
On
as an
how I
adult?
saw myself. Well, here's the thing. Like I was always the successful one. And I'm not saying that my sister's not successful. She's got different goals. She's a lot more realistic about her expectations on her day-to-day life. I was always the driving one, like the Alex Keaton character in female form. And I attained it. Before my conviction, my husband and I lived in a 9,000 square foot house and a very exclusive community in south of Boston. My children went to a combination of public and private schools. We had a pool, we had parties, all the family events were at our house. I was the successful sister. And then my food business imploded. I had my younger two children were about to go off to college, and I was like, we had $10,000 a month mortgage, and I was like, well, how is this going to work? And at the time, one of my children had a concussion, and I had done some research into CBD, and CBD worked wonders for him. So I was like, okay, CBD is a marijuana product.
Right.
My sister, who had been struggling with some health issues of her own, also had a very positive experience with marijuana in her healing. And I was like, there's a reason why all these things are happening at the same time. Why I'm getting this sort of experience of healing from this product. It's now legal in the state where I live. I'm finding myself in very difficult financial circumstances. And what this market really needs is somebody to deliver weed to people's homes, because at the time I started, there were no dispensaries. And
Okay.
if you, even though you may have had a legal right to get marijuana in the state of Massachusetts, your only option was a caregiver. And caregivers were often dressed up drug dealers.
Hmm.
And people might argue that's what I was, but I knew I had been in the food business, so I knew how to deliver. Number one. Number two, I was serve safe certified. So I knew how to produce product that met health regulations. And I also respected the fact that people had a right to this. So if they needed it, if you were a cancer patient and you needed a cannabis product, you shouldn't have to be challenging the wilds of the black market with people who might be at times violent to get something that was going to save your life. And I was like, well, I know they'll be safe with me.
Hmm.
I don't know that they'd be safe with someone else. So that was that. I'm not going to say those were lies I told myself, but that's the way I justified my entry into the industry. I needed the money, and I was the right person at the right place at the right time to do this for people who needed it.
Well, and I think the connection, and it's not a lie, it's that you saw yourself as being able to accomplish a task. You
Right.
had a way to do it, you had a solution, and you also said, these things are lining up. So it must mean
Right.
this is
I
the answer,
interpreted the way I
right?
chose that I was uniquely positioned to fill this role. And that's the way I saw it. But, from a personal perspective, my children, as I said, my younger two are about to go off to college. So my kids were not babies. Had my kids been younger, I would never have taken the risk. I made that conscious decision.
Okay. And seeing yourself in the role again, the successful one always.
Right.
Do you think that had any impact on, I guess, even challenging the system the way you did? How you saw yourself? You're like, oh, I can get away with this, kind of thing.
Well, yes, because let's be honest. I'm a middle-aged white woman. Who's ever going to look at me? You know what I mean? Like, who's going to look at me and say that woman's a problem? But so this began from the right place. It did not stay in the right place
Okay.
because the reality is that because I approached the industry, right, this sort of gray market or black market industry with a white market sensibility, we grew meteorically.
Mm.
Meteorically. We were doing $1 million a month by the time the feds came from me. That was unheard of. That was probably at the time the biggest marijuana delivery service ever to exist on the planet. I mean, it had I not been stopped, the system was brilliant in its simplicity. It could have kept growing and growing and growing. So, did I need to go where I went to satisfy my financial need? No. Did I need it to maintain the lifestyle I had? No. I went way beyond that. I could have survived and paid my bills and brought myself current with this sort of obligation that had been created by my food business at 1/10 the volume that I ended up doing. But
Wow.
once I got to a certain point, it was like, oh, we did this many this week. Well, we need to do this many that week. And if we did this many on 420, then we've got to do that amount every day because it was just sort of, it was intoxicating. No matter how much I did, it was not enough. And at that point, there was no way for me to satisfy the demand by getting product within the state of Massachusetts. I started reaching out to California to bring product to Massachusetts. That's where I ran into federal trouble.
And I'm in California, so
Yeah.
clearly I know there was opportunity.
Yeah.
But I heard you just say something that I want to highlight. You said it was intoxicating.
Yeah.
And I think I heard reciprocal intoxication. What was the intoxication for you, not just your clients or the people you
Well, I
serve?
mean, for me, the intoxication was the rubber, like the road was rising to meet my feet. That's the way it
Mm.
felt. Like I, what all the skills that I had applied to my food business that had at that point rewarded me with failure. Those same skills were now rewarding me with success, like unmeasured, like unstoppable is the way I felt. Like everything that I was good at was thriving inside of this industry. And it felt like I was redeemed. And yeah, I mean, and at that point it was like, okay, how good am I really? Now
Mm.
let's see how far I can push this. If you can do 200 deliveries a day, can you do three? And that meant not just coordinating the day to day, but coordinating the supply. And that meant flying back and forth to California, to LA, and to Portland, Oregon, and meeting with suppliers. And that opened me up to an entirely different realm of celebrity. I mean, I was at Hollywood Hills parties in $20 million homes with the entire room stopping and looking and listening to me talk about weed. And I'm like, don't these people know I'm just some housewife from Milton, Massachusetts? Don't these people know I only learned this stuff 8 months ago? Like, who am I? But that's the way it went. I was met at LAX with a Rolls Royce, a Maserati, whatever I wanted. It was there for me. And the money and I was sought after as an expert and as a potential customer for people who were selling these products out of LA. And I kept looking around like Al Pacino's at the table next to me at this restaurant. Like, how did I get here? And how do I warrant this kind of attention? Um, Always feeling like it was really not that big of a deal. What I was doing was not that big of a deal.
Mm.
But all, and I think you alluded to when we spoke earlier that the lies we tell ourselves, right? And that was a big lie. I told myself, "What this is, I'm not a big deal. This is not a big deal. I'm just doing what I do and trying to make money to protect my family." But what was happening around me was telling me an opposite story.
Mm. So again, and I'm glad you mentioned that because what I try to dig out for people is the lie that becomes the truth.
Oh, yeah, it never became the truth for me because I wound up in big trouble. But um, the lie, it never became the truth for me. The reality that I was no longer the little fish in a big pond. I was the big fish in a big pond at that moment, and I never acknowledged that. It never felt that. I always saw myself as the little fish. And
Mm,
because of that, it completely broke my perception of how the law enforcement would perceive me, right?
mm,
So if you're the big fish, you're the one they're looking at. And I was like, I am not the big fish. I trust me, I am not. I am just doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. Yeah, there's a lot of money involved, but I'm still trust me, I'm just a little fish. And because I did not respect or comprehend what I had become, I left myself exposed to the risk. Now, ultimately, well, what led to my raid wasn't anything I was doing. So it wasn't like my drivers were out there getting into fights or robbing people. Like there was no direct law enforcement involved with what I was doing day to day.
mm,
What happened was there were some people that I had done business with early on, and we had a falling out. And I basically said, "Listen, I don't like the way you guys conduct yourselves. I don't want to do business with you anymore." One of those gentlemen himself had grows in his house in Western Massachusetts, and he got raided twice in 1 year by the feds. Now, when that happens to you, you are now subject to a RICO indictment. And a RICO indictment comes with decades long mandatory minimum sentences. And this particular individual had also already done a federal bid in his younger days for cocaine. I knew this about him, but not until after we were no longer doing business. I knew he had been raided twice. But for us, it was like, oh my God, it was a cautionary tale, not anything that was directly related to what we were doing. What
mm,
happened was he used me and my success, which was something that was sort of like a legend. It became like an urban legend inside of Boston. Oh, I know them. I know what she's doing. I know who she is. I can give you them. So
mm.
he gave the feds what's called a proffer. So in other words, I'm going to give you this person, and then in exchange, you're going to reduce
Yeah.
my burden, right? My legal burden. Um, One of my children, my second oldest boy, knew this about them. He was like, Mom, don't trust those people. You shouldn't trust those people. And I did business with them longer than I should have. And he kept asking me why. And I said, Stefan, they have what I need. They have what I need. I don't like them. I don't like who they are. But at the point that I'm at right now, they have things that I need in order to make this happen. So I accept who they are. When ultimately I was raided, my son was just livid. And it took as a matter of fact, he and I spoke once the entire time I was in prison. He just was like, he blamed me for
Mm.
what happened. And I can't even really blame him for feeling that way. So that's part of the cost, you know?
That's huge. I heard a couple of things, but I want to go back and just ask
Okay.
a very pointed question. Do you think being the sister that wasn't the visible, pretty one made you see yourself as that small fish, even when you were big? Because again, that those dynamics, you're kind of, oh, I'm just in the sister in the
You
background.
know,
I'm just in a book, and
it's, you know what? I never looked at it in that context, but probably
Mhm.
because it was the dynamic. Wendy was and is beautiful. She's dated celebrities. I mean, she's just one of the, particularly like in her younger days in the 80s and the 90s, she was a showstopper. And growing up, it was still, even when I had boyfriends, it was, the comment was how beautiful your sister is. So maybe to a certain extent, pretty one, and I was the smart one.
Yeah.
So maybe there was some lingering expectation of inferiority against maybe not just her, but against, who I always considered myself to be, a sort of inherent humility that was not healthy, right? And it might have had, I could connect it back to my parents, sort of tumultuous end to their marriage, and
Mm.
feeling like I needed to be the responsible one to take care of my sister who came behind me, that there was a time when my parents weren't particularly functional. And I was often the one who would willingly put myself into the subservient or the secondary role. I don't know why, and I will say that role kind of continued as a mom, right? You do that very naturally. I mean, I had my first child when I was 20 and my last child when I was almost 30. And I fell directly into that self-deprecating, them first, me second role. But what you can't temper is my ambition. I've always been ambitious. I was the first person in my family ever to go to college. I was the first person in my family ever to have a professional role, to travel for work, to buy a house, to do all these things that, so even though I accepted that there was some inferiority physical with my sister, I never accepted that that was enough to sort of hold me back. I always believed that regardless of what obstacles were in my way, I was going to find a way over them. That might be the truth for you, but that's not necessarily the truth for me. So it was a more othering of myself from an intellectual standpoint that was probably responsible for me believing that I would be excused from the consequence.
Mm, okay. Interesting. And it's so important to see how subtle that little message. It was never spoken, probably by anybody.
Right.
But if she's smart, then they're going to look at her,
Right.
not going to look at me,
Right.
even when I'm doing a whole lot to be seen
Right.
in
Well,
many places.
yeah, I mean, and it, for me, it was, I fundamentally did not believe what I was doing was wrong because I was doing the right thing. Oh, let me put it this way. I was doing the wrong thing for the right reasons.
Hmm.
And as a matter of fact, I remember being I had a house in North Hollywood in Toluca Lake. And I was sitting there with one of my suppliers. And one of the, he looked at me and he said, aren't excuse the expression, you are balls out. He said, aren't you worried? And I said, the reality is if the feds want me, they're going to come for me. There isn't anything I'm going to do to stop it. I said, for all I know, my picture is up on a bulletin board right now, connected by strings to a bunch of other people. But my hope is that if that happens, when that happens, the recognition of what I did and how I did it will mitigate whatever the consequences have to be, because what I was never was violent. And trust me, there were opportunities. I mean, I had drivers who were robbed by gunpoint in one particular neighborhood here. And I was approached by gang members who said, listen, you can't let that happen to you. You need to respond to this with a show of strength. And I remember being like, that's power. Being able to pick up the phone and say, that's power. But I was like, you know what? That's not the kind of power I want. And I don't want that to come back on me because I just don't, right? Whatever consequence came to me from having a few $100s of weed stolen from my drivers was only going to come back on me with a vengeance if I used violence. And so I think that when ultimately things did explode, now I will say that, like, after the raid, I hired an attorney. Obviously, my attorney started talking to the AUSA. And his response to me very early on was like, listen, Deana, they think they've got the female version of Tony Soprano on their hands. And I kind of laughed. I was like, I can see why they think that. Me flying back and forth to LA, and people who were managing as much money as I was managing generally have weapons. I said, but that's not true. And ultimately, like, my approach to this whole, while this is all going on, while I'm being investigated, the feds are going to everybody who worked for me. They actually sent target letters to my two oldest sons, and my older boys happen to be biracial. So I'm thinking they are going to be visited with consequences much worse than me, because let's be honest, I'm a white woman. They're black men. So I went to them both, and I went to them both, and I went to all the people who work for me, and I said, you tell them everything. You tell them everything. Because in the end, I am the one they want. They don't want you. And what they don't know is the fact that what they think happened didn't happen. So what they think is that I am running guns, that I am running weed, or I'm running more dangerous drugs, that I am involved in things that are offshore. So you tell them everything you know, and ultimately they are going to find out that I am exactly who I present to be, which is just a woman who assembled a team to be selling weed inside the state of Massachusetts. And that's more or less how it played out.
Yeah.
It took them 8 months, but when they finally indicted me, there were no weapons charges, there were no mitigating factors, there were no what they're called enhancements on the federal side. So when you push that forward
Would have been,
what's that?
which would have been violence, murder.
Oh yeah, I mean,
That
if
type of
I mean, I was in prison with women who did. I mean, marijuana is Schedule 1. It's still crazy as that sounds. There's talk about rescheduling, but it hasn't been done. So I was at the worst scenario, like in the money range, in the weight range, in the schedule range. the mandatory minimum I was looking at was 10 years. Had I had guns,
It would have been enhanced.
now we're talking about expanding those mandatory minimums, and then you are now excluded from, First Step Act or RDAP reductions or any of these other sentence mitigation.
Translate that for those of us who.
Okay, so the First Step Act was put in place by President Trump during his first term, and it basically gave inmates earned time off for productive activities inside of prison. And that basically is 15 days off every 30 days you serve. So it's basically you can get 50% of your sentence off up to a year, as long as you maintain activities inside the prison. So in my case, I taught GED the whole time I was there. Had I had a gun enhancement, I would not have qualified for that. Okay. I also was given a judicial recommendation for a treatment program inside of the Bureau of Prisons called RDAP. And RDAP is a 9-month program that you take. It's 3 phases. You've got to pass them all. And that once you complete that successfully, you are given a year off your sentence. Now, there are conditions that are put on you that you must fulfill, because if you don't fulfill them, they will bring you back and they will force you to serve that year. But that was not an issue for me. So I ended up getting 1 year off for RDAP, and I got 6 months off for First Step Act, and then I was able to get some halfway house time. So all told, I was sentenced to 48 months. I served 18 of them.
Wow. So how has that changed you?
How has it changed me? Personality wise, I would say it hasn't. I mean, I'm in my late 50s. You're not going to break me with 18 months. Right. What I will say it has done internally is I was fearless, absolutely fearless before this all happened. Clearly, right? Because I just ran headlong into a federal prosecution. Out on this side of it, I see myself differently. Like I'm much more like stick a toe in the water first, wait and see what happens, and then stick it in. I guess what I'm saying is I'm more tentative. Mm-hmm. I don't run at new ideas anymore. And there are benefits to that, right? I'm not running and getting myself into any more legal trouble. But I'm not running toward new ventures as quickly. Like I have to metabolize them before I actually consider them. And even if I wish to move faster, I just can't. I have to be thoroughly examining something before I can move forward, which, when you look at the context of decision making, and that's really what I'm focused on in my podcast, that's really where you engineer a change in outcome, is in that moment to pause, right? In that moment where you say, okay, this is the way I would have made this decision previously. Now I'm trying for a different outcome. I have to look at this differently, and I'm not going to say that every instance of reexamination is positive, because there are some times where I'm hyper conservative. Like, when I first, just a small example, when I came out and started using ChatGPT, I'd be like, what's going to happen if I ask it this question? And then I just have to be like, what do you think's going to happen? Like, what are you afraid of? It's a computer program. Stop it. And it took a while for me to get over that the hesitance of using new things, because there's this waiting for this other shoe to drop feeling that I had. I moved past it. I'm probably 85% back to the sort of intellectual person I was before, and the ability to operate within a system and to create a business and to be, commercially aggressive is coming back. On sort of more funnier ways. I came out, I could not sleep more than 5 hours a night for the longest time. And that's not how I was going in. I mean, when, when in Danbury in particular, it's an open barrack. So I want you to think about this for a minute. Imagine somebody gives you a mat and a pillow, and they take you to Home Depot on a Sunday morning. They take you to the paint department, clear off a shelf, and say, go there and take a nap. That's what sleeping at Danbury was like. Open. And I was top bunk because I was fit, right? Didn't matter how old you are. If you can get up and down the bunk, you're at the top bunk. So even if you're in a cube, top bunk, you can be seen by everybody who's on top bunk around you. Oh. The lights go automatically on, the lights go automatically off. And even though the lights may go off at 10 o'clock, the unit just typically didn't quiet down until midnight. And then I was in a program and I taught GED. So I had to be up by 5. So even though it was only 18 months of that kind of rigidity, I came out and emulated those 18 months, so, at least 2 years. I'm actually just now starting to sleep longer than 5 hours a night.
So certainly, yeah, that would make sense. There'd be alterations to your circadian rhythms and even
Yeah, your
your nervous
biochemistry.
system
Yeah,
just settle
yeah,
down and be able to to relax.
right.
Wow. Did you ever experience any occasions of violence or attacks when you were incarcerated?
Okay. So, no. And there's a reason for that because I uh, I never threw a punch in my whole life. I never had to. It just not the arena I was in, right? Even in the context of the weed business. But I didn't know what I was walking into. We hear stories, right? And some people will tell you state's easier than fed's easier than state. I had no way of knowing. So, and I knew I was going, right? I was rated 2018. I didn't report until 2022. So during that time, I actually got involved in jujitsu. I got my blue belt. And I selected jujitsu specifically because jujitsu is what they call a gentle art. So jujitsu is a submission, it's a non-striking art. So what it teaches you basically is how to neutralize a situation without actually hitting anyone, right? So what I learned to do essentially was to choke people out. And I'm not going to say that that was my goal going in. My goal with jujitsu was um, there's when you have confidence, a martial confidence, you carry yourself a certain way. And I knew that if I didn't have confidence in my own ability to defend myself, it would show. It would show in my body language, even if I tried to hide it.
Right.
So jujitsu gave me the ability, and this was the sort of the mantra that I would say in my head when I was frightened: is head up, shoulders back, head up, shoulders back. Don't look like a target. You are not a target. So in order to reinforce that, when I got to Alderson, now Alderson is different. Alderson had cubes. It wasn't an open barracks. And each unit had what they called the horseshoe, which was the space up front that theoretically a guard would be in. For budget reasons, there was never a guard in the horseshoe, but there was a big open area. So within the first 2 weeks of being there, I did my jujitsu warm-ups in the horseshoe on concrete, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, knee slides, shrimps, just these different motions that most people in the South had never seen before. So it didn't take long for people to say, "Oh, she's a black belt." And I was like, "Well, I'm not a black belt, but if I'm a blue belt. But and I'll tell you the truth if you ask me. But if you want to spread the rumor that I'm a black belt, that's fine. You can think what you choose." And then I happened to be in the next cube over from the loudest mouth in the unit, and they were asking me about jujitsu, and they were like, "Well, what do you mean?" They were talking about it, and I said, "Really, you don't ever have anything to worry about me. Just don't show me your back." And they're like, "What does that mean?" And I was like, "Well, do you want me to show you what it means?" And she's like, "Sure." So I put her in what's called a rear naked choke, just gently, right? So it's head here, and this is your arm, and then your other arm kind of goes behind the head, and basically it's a blood choke. It's what George Floyd, that sort of, it blocks off the carotid arteries.
Okay.
I didn't put any pressure on her, but she's like, "Oh," she tapped right away. "Oh, let me go, let me go." She goes, that was crazy. Like, don't ever come near me again." Like, "No, I don't intend to. You asked, and I showed you." It didn't take long before that got around the unit too. So once that was done, I just sort of settled back into whatever reputation people created for me, and I just went about my business. I saw violence. I mean, there were, in camps, you tend to get a certain type of inmate, and they tend to be nonviolent, but that doesn't mean that a violent offender can't work their way, get their points down so that they qualify to be in a camp. And there were some murderers at Alderson. And there was one instance where, and not in a unit that I was in, but there was a conflict, and 5 girls ganged up on one other woman, and a woman probably in her 40s, and they stomped her.
Mm.
And it was just very sobering. There were some transgender inmates that I crossed paths with, some that were male transitioning to female, and there were instances of violence in that scenario. One older woman, probably in her 60s, was beaten pretty badly by a transgender
Mm.
female, and so yes, there was violence. Fortunately, whether it was because I spread the right rumor or just because I knew how to stay away from the wrong people, I myself was not personally impacted.
Wow. Definitely that chapter.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as you look ahead, I know your podcast is in creation. Do you have a
It
name
is.
for it? And what's the message of that you want to share? We talked a little bit about it in the intro, but to our listeners, how
So,
can they find you and follow you and what will they gain in your
okay.
space?
So it is not, yeah, it's not published yet. It will probably, I would say that by October 1, if not sooner, I'll come up with my first 4 episodes. It's called American Regret. It will be on all major podcasting platforms. There will be a social media presence, TikTok, uh, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Um, the tone behind it, or the intent behind American Regret, is to explore decision making, as I pointed out. That basically it starts with regret. Where is regret built?
Mhm.
Regret is built in bad decisions. And my opinion with regret is if you're carrying it, you're creating it. So if you haven't processed what you've come to regret, you are going to keep creating it moving forward. So that boils down to me in examining your decisions, right? Sometimes you can fly away and you can make a really bad decision that will have long-term impact, but isn't necessarily indicative of a bad system of decision making.
Mhm.
I don't think that's the case for most of us. I think most of us um, have decision making patterns that form our circumstances. And if you are not where you choose to be at the moment, why? Where is the pattern that has got you where you are? And that comes down to um, you know how you handle stressful decisions. How do you handle when you are how do you react when you're being challenged emotionally, and are you consistently making the wrong decision under stressful situations, which is in a sense drama, right?
Right.
One of the aspects of my podcast is what we'll be examining, what I'm calling the drama response, which is
Mhm.
when you're in a fight or flight mode,
Right.
what kind of decisions are you making, and can you back that up, and can you learn to sort of decode or rewire the drama response, because ultimately drama creates negativity inside of relationships, and ultimately relationships are what determine your success, whether they're business, personal, familial, spousal. If you're constantly in conflict, constantly in drama, eventually that's going to start showing up in your economic potential. And that'll show up in where you live, what you drive, how you spend your free time. So, I want to decode drama, and I want to take that backward into decisions, because also decisions, as I pointed out earlier, are patterns. And if you can't identify why you never seem to have the job you want, or why you never seem to have the interactions with your bosses you want, or your coworkers, you're not going to decode that in one decision. You've got to look at the micro decisions that you're making. And it could be the way you do dishes, it could be inherent in the way you drive. But if you can identify the pattern, you can change it. So the power in micro decisions is both to create scenarios that are de-evolutionary, but then if you can go back and rewire them, they become evolutionary. And that's really what our goal is. So, yes, that sounds very clinical, right? But the truth of the matter is decisions are hilarious. I mean, think about some of the stuff we do and you look back and say, what on earth was I thinking? And so we're going to explore decisions that are heartrending. We will explore decisions that are painful. We will explore decisions that are shake my head, like what was I thinking? And we will explore the funny ones. Like, why did I have that argument with my 3-year-old over chicken nuggets? I think we spoke about that earlier. Why did I get that tattoo? Why did I have sex with that person? Why did I take that job? Why did I just say that to my boss? My God, my husband and I, we have this argument over and over and over and over again. Why can we not get past it? Those are all indicative of either macro decision patterns or micro decisions, or the way we handle stress in a conflict environment. And how do you decode that and start to make different decisions? For me, what I noticed, like on a small level, I was paying attention once to how I did dishes. And I was like, why is there always water everywhere when I do dishes? And I stopped and I was like, because you're in a rush. And
Mhm.
I'm thinking about that. And I'm like, I'm in a rush to do just about everything I do: laundry, dishes, driving, grocery shopping, putting things away. My hands are always moving so fast. And I noticed that also had a tendency, when I'm rushing to get out of the house, to forget things. Or when I'm rushing to an outcome, I would leave things out, like getting licensed for marijuana, right? So when you start, and essentially I'm taking shortcuts because I'm in a hurry.
Mm.
So now I'm forcing myself to slow down. If you do the dishes in a measured way, you don't end up with water everywhere. You don't have a mess to clean. If you're stopped and you look over your shoulder before you back out of a parking spot, you are a lot less likely to hit someone. Slow down. So those are the micro decisions I'm learning to remake. And to a certain extent, that's working out really well with regard to developing this new concept because one of the things I might have done before was to rush and start a business without actually doing the legal paperwork, right? This time I was like, nope, I hired a lawyer. I created an LLC. We did it the right way because this part of me taking macro decisions and making better micro decisions and making better macro decisions.
I love
But
that.
that's the goal. I mean, so in essence, it'll be funny. It will be engaging. You will see yourself because when I started the RDAP program in prison, I said to myself, I don't need this. I'm one of 3 women in this entire unit with a college education. What are these people going to teach me? And I said, you're just going to fake it till you make it because you want that year off, right? I had my first grandchild on the way. First week of sitting in that room, I went, oh, yes. Like there are women with 3rd grade educations and, meth printed on their faces, talking about situations that I had, doing things I had done, making decisions I had made, having conversations I had made. And I was like, yeah, you are no better than any of these women. So, now this is your chance. This is your chance to re-engineer. So, I will be looking for that sort of experience inside of American Regret. We are going to, there's no better than anybody else. This is just the reality that we find ourselves in. And we're going to examine and we're going to laugh. And I'm going to interview. I mean, my first round of episodes will be interviews with people that were in prison at the same time I was. We'll be decoding their decisions because, as you pointed out, prison is the consequence most of us consider to be second only to death, right?
Mm.
So if they've got things to teach us, they're definitely willing to learn. But I will also be examining viral clips, and that will be under the drama response title where we celebrate conflict, right? We think Karen videos are hilarious. There's a whole class of men who do reaction videos to Karen. So you have men judging middle-aged women for their reactions, and then you have the people who are challenging Karens on screen. Granted, most Karen behavior is very difficult to find redeeming in any way,
Right.
but Karens, in my opinion, are made, they're not born, right? So where did that come from? And what advice would we offer that Karen in that moment? Like, really, is this screaming match that got you arrested worth letting that person just park in front of your house? But for the person who was arguing over that parking spot, did you need the argument? You could have just left your car there and walked away. And you, who are on screen in front of all this, getting viewers on the reaction, what are you offering in this situation other than exacerbating it with your opinion? So I want to bring a new lens to the way we view people devolving online.
Mm.
Go ahead, laugh at it, but in the end, let's try to learn from it too.
Exactly. And even what I hear in all of this, predicating what we lead into to make our decisions and to establish our patterns, it still goes back to how we see ourselves. So then
Yeah.
that's where I go back to the little girl, the little boy, and it's like, how did you see yourself that you have to show up in the world a certain way? Whether you believed you had to perpetuate this identity, positive or negative, how close is that to the truth of who you are? Do you know, or did you just assume the position, assume the mantle, the role, and go through life? So
In
love
some
that.
cases, one of the things that we discussed in RDAP work, conditions, cognition, and choice, right? The condition is the environment, the environment in which you were raised, and the heredity, right? The sort of personality traits passed on. You really are not in a position to change either of those. They are what they are. But cognition is your self-talk. How do you take who you are and how do you process who you are compared to what you're seeing and turn that into behavior? That's where you're influenced by what you hear and by what people say about you or to you. And generationally, I think you and I probably both grew up at a time when women were much more marginalized than they are now. I mean, when growing up in the 70s and the early 80s, there was still some expectation that you would come out of college and you would be a secretary for some length of time.
Mhm.
So, this newness, this sort of Me Too, and this sort of new freedom that comes to women from social media is still relatively new. It really is. So the young women today don't see it that way, but I think you and I probably do understand the evolution that women have had even recently. But so how you were raised as a girl, how your parents saw your role still affects what you will accept from the people around you. So yes, it's connected, but the caveat, of course, is excusing yourself from a better outcome because this is your background. I was in prison with women who most cases were the children of drug using mothers, right? So there's the expectation of perpetuity or perpetuating that experience. And in some cases I could see where, based on conversation and interaction, that their children were heading the same way.
Mhm.
And at some point, you, as an adult, you have to take responsibility for the patterns and say, if I don't change this, who's going to? Because otherwise it's just going to play itself to the future. And that's where I think American regret can create impact. Let's stop the pattern. Take responsibility. I'm 57 years old. I'm not blaming what happened to me and my parents. That ship sailed 30 years ago or 40 years ago. Now it's like, okay, yes, all these things are true about your background and your upbringing and the era in which you were raised. That is, you cannot change the past. You can process it, you can use it to inform the future, but do not excuse yourself from the ability to do better. And I think many of us do. We believe that we are who we are. We can't change. We can't equals I won't or I don't want to. Let's be real. And I intend to sort of break that cycle, or to break that belief that just because you say you can't doesn't mean you can't. You can. You're going to make a difference. You're going to you make a choice to choose better. And that begins with these small decisions, like don't be such a slob when you're making the dishes. You're washing the dishes.
I love that. Thank you so much, Deana.
Yeah, thank you.
What I'll say to our listeners is, as you're journeying to wholeness, as you're considering not only the identification of what little girl has gone through, then there's also that whole process of what patterns and decisions am I making? Once I know this information, the No More Lies Healing Journal and Workbook is to make those adjustments to break the patterns, break the perpetuation of our self-identity and our image. So thank you for this time. Tune in again to Stacy Speaks Hope. Look out for American Regret in fall of 2025. And
if anybody's interested in sharing their story, they can email me at deana@americanregret.net. DEANA. And I'd be happy to consider anybody. I mean, we'll literally, if anybody has a story of decision making they want to share, I'm down to hear it.
We will definitely add that in our description so people can find you and reach out. Thank you so much for that offer, because everybody's made decisions.
Yes. Good, bad, and indifferent.
Good, bad, and otherwise. So thank you so much and be blessed.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Stacy Speaks Hope. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share.
Wrong woman, holding in story, she needs to tell what God really wants you to do in this world. In His name, hope to break free from the shackles and the lies that have become your truth and put blinders on your eyes. You built walls around your heart. You have plugged up your ears. Get freedom to hope's what you need. It's in reach. Wipe your tears, little girl.